afternoon. I'm Marc Bailey. Today, we gathered together for a discussion on behalf of the UK Airworthiness Strategic Forum. Just so people understand, that's a group that's been pulled together by airlines, MROs, the Rotary community, and soon to be joined by RPAS for drones and autonomous vehicles. And we're trying to represent the interests of industry to both regulator and DFT. Now, before I leave my guests hanging around too much, can I introduce John Bool of Harrods and Andy Preston of TECHNICair. If you can introduce yourself a bit and tell us about your company and your scope of approvals, just so that the people who are listening have an idea.
Yes, thank you, Mark. My name's Andy Preston. I'm the Managing Director of TECHNICair. Sorry, Mark, put that right. We're the MR&O division of Signature Flight Support in Europe. We've been in business in aircraft maintenance for more than 40 years now, primarily biz jets, and up until the last sort of 3 or 4 years, primarily Cessna citations. We have Part 145, obviously EASA, FAA, and we're also Guernsey, Jersey, and Isle of Man approved for Part 145. We're also an independent Part M, Part Camo coming up for Isle of Man, Jersey, and EASA as well. So lots of scope, and always looking to move that one forward as well. So that's a brief introduction. Myself, I've been in the industry 35 years, mainly in MRO, particularly engines, before coming back into the business aviation maintenance world as a whole. So that's a quick snapshot.
That's brilliant. You really cantered through that at a great pace. Thank you very much, Andy. John, your turn.
Thank you, Mark. My name's John Bool. I'm the Technical Director for Harrods Aviation. Harrods Aviation is both an FBO and a maintenance organisation, and we work out of 2 locations. That's London Luton and London Stansted airports. Quite a wide variety of types. We're an ASF for both Sikorsky and Bombardier, and therefore we cover both helicopters and fixed wing. As you can imagine, that produces some of its own challenges. Stansted is mainly helicopters, and Luton is our Bombardier ASF. We're also Part M, and we have far too many regulatory approvals for me to go through now, but very similar to what Andy has just gone through.
Yeah, it's great having a long list until you actually have to manage them, isn't it? That's
yes, or even go through them.
Now, we've been in this process for quite some time now. So if you can cast your mind back, when you could see this all starting to occur, what did you do as organisations to prepare for the potential change in working? I'm going to go to you, John, first. Exactly how did you broach the whole concept of lockdown and pandemic?
It's a very good subject to cover, I think, initially, Mark. As you can imagine, it was going into the great unknown. We certainly didn't know where it was going to start and where it was going to finish. We initially made the decision on the 27th of March to shut the business. And again, I refer back to, we're both an FBO and a maintenance organisation. Perhaps as a maintenance organisation, we could have kept going, but as an FBO with no aircraft coming into any of the facilities, that was a challenge. We had maintenance going on at both locations, which we had to shut down and advise the authority that we were closing. That came with its own challenges. First of all, Luton was easier because we managed to clear all the aircraft up. Stansted, we had a number of based aircraft. We also had aircraft on check that were only halfway through. So we're now having to extend check cycles and find a way of making sure the handover process was done. We did that in a very short period, in fact, less than 5 days from the decision being made. Once we were shut down, we then started looking at how we were going to start up. And, that at that time, nobody knew. We were shut down for about 6 weeks. During that time, we still came in once a week, ground run the serviceable helicopters, and looked over the aircraft that were on check to make sure there's nothing untoward. We did what we could do on the inhibiting side against what the manufacturers recommended, and we kept that going until we reopened. You know, from the point of view of reopening, we then had to put all the checks and measures in that we've become so familiar with now. Screens, you know, we put screens in front of stores, we put screens in front of our reception areas, and the inevitable amount of hand cleanser in all locations. I have to say it was a very challenging period, even during shutdown. There's still a lot of customers to contact and ongoing discussions, but I think we managed it as best we could. From my view, I would have preferred to kept the maintenance facility going if we could have, but to be quite honest, with no aircraft coming into Luton, that wasn't feasible, and what you can't just shut down one section of the business just like that. But we did reopen. It's been a successful reopening. We opened both bases within a couple of days of each other. Luton was opened once we had the work to manage through that facility. So obviously we furloughed nearly 75% of our staff. There was only a few of us left within engineering that were not on furlough. And from a point of view of Stansted, we chose a slightly smaller start. The helicopters are obviously smaller aircraft, and does give you challenges trying to keep social distancing.
Yeah.
So initially we only opened up with one helicopter and about 5 staff until we managed to get the processes in place where we could turn the rest of the aircraft on.
Comprehensive then, Andy. How did you find it with the different aspects that you saw?
Yeah, I think, you know, from our perspective, as John was saying, as this whole pandemic started to unfold in front of us in early March, the government are obviously giving out advice, and all through this, our mandate has been to follow UK government and Public Health England advice, along with our parent company's TECHNICair. We've been very consistent in the way we've applied those rules to the staff. But the week before the government locked down completely on the 23rd of March, we'd already made a decision to move as many of the non-essential staff that could work from home into a staggered work pattern to get less people in the building, start the social distancing. Obviously, we had contingency planning meetings to decide what the long term was. We had a busy start to the year, so we had a pipeline full right through May. So customers, we had lots of aircraft on long-term checks. So our decision to stay open was an easy one. The main proviso was the safety of our staff, our customers, and making sure that we could operate in that sort of the new norm environment, if you like, which we successfully implemented. So we've managed to stay open from the 23rd right through to now. We've had a decent level of business. Obviously, there's been a drop off with flying, but the scheduled events and the commitments that we had up to the half year have all materialised for the maintenance. Obviously, a lot of operators are not flying, but some were. We were supporting the pandemic operations with repatriation flights, with medical support, with some cargo stuff. So we've managed to keep those operators flying, and we've managed to keep the shop busy. What we did do is combine our day shifts into the 2 7-day-a-week 4-on-4-off shifts, so we minimised the amount of crossover, the amount of potential virus spread risk. As soon as everyone was set up and capable, we had all office and support staff working from home, only coming in when absolutely necessary, and same with management staff. And it's worked very well. You know, we followed all the way along, as I mentioned. Any change in the government advice, we've maintained social distancing. Everybody's got access to masks. Anybody that wasn't happy about being asked to come to work was treated individually and dealt with one-on-one. And it's you know, I'm pleased to say that we managed to not only protect the safety of our business, but we've also managed to protect the long-term viability of the business. So we never have to shut the base maintenance facility. The other challenges, of course, we've got an extensive mobile service and line station network, one at Luton, one at Biggin Hill, one in Manchester. And obviously that activity tailed off with the flying activity. So what we chose to do there was redeploy those guys on their shifts into the base. So we managed to keep everyone in the job, everyone busy. We've had 1 or 2 furloughs, but those have mainly been for screening or medical or personal reasons. So all in all, I'm very proud of what the team have achieved, but collectively as a business that we've managed it. You know, I'm not saying it's been easy because it hasn't been, you know, and it's adapting and changing day by day, but it's been a relatively good ride, if you know what I mean, in circumstances.
Yeah, not easy, but both of you sound like you've been managing it quite comprehensively, and that's a story I picked up from a lot of our members. You've mentioned about the office staff and management staff working from home and remote working, which we're practicing now in terms of our discussion.
Indeed.
How have people found that, and do you think there's any benefit longer term? John, what do you think?
Well, it was interesting, to say the least, that the working from home thing was almost imposed upon us. So as soon as we shut down the business, we then started using Microsoft Teams. That worked really well. Mm-hmm. I have to say, grasping that technology, as we talked about earlier, was a little challenging at times, but it certainly has come into its own. You know, at the moment, because we have 2 locations, we often travel between 2 locations, you know, for meetings. And that has helped as a byproduct of that. We don't do as much traveling between locations now. So that has been very good. I think the stability of the systems has surprised me. I have to say, I thought we would have more issues than we did, given that as soon as we closed down, we were all working from home. The system was very stable. And I think the fact that we could communicate with the rest of the staff was very useful. So the MD managed to do fairly regular briefings on a Friday that went out to all the staff. And again, using technology, I hate to think what it would be like if we hadn't had that facility.
No, it's been a lot slicker than I think many of us imagined, probably because we'd had attempts before and maybe it was a different time, but it's certainly better now than a lot of us expected. How about for you, Andy? How are you finding it, particularly looking forward? Do you think there can be more advantages to this going forward for us?
I think what it's going to do, I think John hit the nail on the head with, I think it's do we need to travel for a meeting? Do you need to be face to face all the time? I think as we were forced into it to be all working remotely, those that could, I think the effectiveness of the meetings, the frequency of the meetings potentially increased to start with, because you wanted to make sure that you maintain the level of, because you're not face to face every day, you miss that nuance, that talking, that sort of thing that you just walk past the office and stop. I think we increased that. We did regular forums, but I think later into the pandemic situation, we start to see some cracks appear in the effectiveness of some of that communication and just the day-to-day interaction and key bits of information. Because whether we like it or not, working from home is a completely different environment. There's distractions, particularly people that have got families that were not at school and stuff like that. So it wasn't ideal in all situations, but it's absolutely been essential in getting us through this period. Longer term, absolutely, I think that we will continue to use it as a flexible tool. I think the reality is at the moment, based on what I've just mentioned about some cracks appearing and things starting to get missed, if people are working in the office, we'll encourage that. If they've got situations where they can't work because they've got, whether it's different childcare arrangements, things like that, we're open to flexible situations like that. But I certainly think the business travel for meetings, and I think this is where it might have an impact in the overall industry for business travel moving forwards. I think a lot more people now, particularly long haul, things like that, are comfortable with this kind of forum to have what is really a decent meeting, a decent forum for a meeting. You're all face to face. You can see each other's expressions, and it's a lot more effective than a telephone call, obviously. So.
Yeah, I think that I mean, it almost feels like we could be self-harming here from a point of view of aviation, but certainly some of the groups that I've worked with and European, we've had discussions and said, well, as far as we're concerned, for our 4 board meetings, we're going to hold 3 of them virtually in the future and only get together once for a face-to-face, because it works well. And why waste money and time? So it's good, but we've got to be careful. Oh, damn, this has gone out on the video. Please don't print it, anybody. Now, you both mentioned having to do some furloughing. I'm also picking up from industry that people are having to make difficult decisions when their work is starting to slow down and they haven't necessarily got the revenue coming in. Have you had to make any difficult decisions in terms of cost cutting, staff issues, training, or anything like that as a consequence of what we face now? I'm going to come back to you first, Andy, on this one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the overall staffing, as I mentioned, we've had a very busy base maintenance period, and we've also had a strong pipeline. So direct engineers, we haven't had to make any specific decisions, and we don't hopefully foresee that as the market starts to pick up now again in the long term. But as I mentioned, what we have used it to our advantage is where we've had people that have got either their relatives or close people that they have to be looked after or screened or isolate. So we've managed to use it to that. In terms of the difficult decisions, you're absolutely right. It's more about managing the costs of operating the business under these conditions. It's, yes, non-essential spending. Capital's been, we've parked a lot of projects that we were working on. We're not invested yet in some of the training programs we were going to put in place, whether it's type training or other stuff. We've put a lid on overtime for the last 3 or 4 months. So it's about making the right decisions for our business as it is. Other parts of our greater business have obviously had a different situation, and yes, we've had to cut our cloth to suit like everyone else. And I think the one thing I mentioned just now, which I'm really pleased about, one of the things I explained to the team when I said, look guys, we're going to need to stay open, we're going to need to keep working. If we can get through this period and come out the other side, we're going to be in a much stronger position than a lot of other companies, and that has actually proved to be the truth for us. And that's a strong. It's not unfortunately the same for all of our fellow businesses in the aviation industry. But I think the safety of the people, safety of the customers, but prolonging or protecting the future was key for us. So we've cut spending where we need to, but not at the expense of keeping people in work where we could.
No. And John, how about for your group?
I think Andy's covered a number of the subject that I would have said. If you think about the low-hanging fruits such as overtime, training, some of the other costs to the business, we've done a very much the same. We have, I have to say, done a couple of online training courses. These were courses that were booked and paid for before COVID-19 cut off the business, and we have done one or two of those online, which has been interesting. But the business as a whole has had to do some restructuring, not within engineering at the present time, but when you see the amount of flights that are now coming into UK airports, obviously our business is split in half between FBO work and engineering. We are not seeing the throughput of traffic that we did prior to the pandemic. The biggest issue has been at Stansted. That's been a fairly dramatic reduction. By now we would be doing a lot of wide body aircraft. At Luton, we are seeing a gradual return, which is positive. We did our first day with 20 movements last week. So that is on the climb back up to where we should be.
I mean, that is positive, and we're hearing little cells of good positive things going on. I'm still picking up from presentations that I've seen with DFT and industry. We're talking about 120,000 job losses across aviation as a whole. And just something to test out, one of the things trying to set up is an aviation services clearinghouse with government, so that all of those people can go in and be registered and have the opportunity. A couple of things. Firstly, to be able to track them so that we know where they are going forward. And then for those that we can, particularly sort of with SMEs, the opportunity to flow them through to SMEs and maybe retain 10 or 15% of the people that we would be losing. So it's maybe something that we can do. The issue is that you've seen the sort of economic models that are kicking around, I'm sure, and the recovery for scheduled aviation and ourselves may not be paralleled. What have you picked up and what are your expectations? I'll kick off with you first, John. How do you think it's going to go, the shape of what you're seeing at the moment?
That's a very good question, Mark. I wish my crystal ball was that clear. I think we have seen a steady throughput of both our facilities, and I'd like to think that would continue. Certainly the aircraft that we are seeing are continuing to fly. Mainly the larger corporates, not so much the smallers, but the larger corporates are still flying, and they're clocking up the hours so that they need the scheduled maintenance. The longer term output is difficult to see and understand for a wide variety of reasons. I think the biggest issue that we will all face going forward is twofold. One, this will clearly have a massive impact on workforce in so many different areas, but you know that there will be changes to the workforces, and we've already seen those announcements. And longer term, that will mean that things like apprenticeships will get cut, and certain amount of engineers will drop out of the industry. So longer term, that's going to hurt us, I would think. So we're going to lose there's going to be skill fade within the business. The second part of it is how it affects corporate aviation. Now, I like to think that corporate aviation will bounce back quicker than the airlines. You know, we've seen that to a certain extent within our business. Luton, as I said, it is coming back. You know, we're seeing between 15 and 20 movements a day, whereas only 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were in the 1s and 2s. So I do think corporate aviation will bounce back quicker than the airlines will. But to see how this is going to pan out longer term is, in my view, very difficult to predict.
Yeah, sorry to really ask that question, because a lot of people paid a lot of money to do the research, aren't really able to give the answers. So it's a bit cruel. But in truth, Andy, it's your go now.
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, I've been polishing my crystal ball for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and it's still cloudy. So I think, you know, joking aside, I think it is slightly impossible to predict. But I think I concur with John. I think there's a big opportunity for business aviation if the operators and the you know, and the ownership and the fractionals get this right. But to have a massive bounce back compared to the corporate, the commercial airlines, because you know there's an attitude change, I think, to travel. And no, we talked about business aviation travel, but I think you have to bring leisure travel into the picture for business aviation operators now, because if they put the price points right, you know that people's fear of the virus and maybe things like that is going to allow more people to spend money on a 6-seat, a 10-seat jet with half a dozen people on it, knowing who they're with, flying to places for their, you know, for not something other than just business, make it affordable, and I think it can bounce back. We're already starting to see a lot of operators put out things like that. I've seen a lot of adverts recently. I've seen new operators pop up in the last couple of weeks offering executive class flying to places, you know, that people go on holiday. So I think there's a massive opportunity if we as a business aviation community get this right collectively.
And in a way, it's not even necessarily direct competition with airlines, because they can't put on the premium scheduled flights because they just don't have the loads in there to make it cost effective.
Absolutely.
So we're only picking up the things that can't actually be served at this point in time. So actually it's helping to keep aviation going and moving it to whatever the new norm is. So it's a good thing getting aviation working together rather than really heavy competition going on with it. And coming up next time, stay tuned for discussions about Brexit and a little discussion about next generation too, which is a really important topic for everyone to consider.